Okay.
It's live.
Hi, everybody. We are back here today again to continue our series of chats about Ireland and everything related to Ireland. Our theme is still migration, social transformation, globalization, and post-Celtic Tiger Ireland 2008 to 2020 in films and plays. Today, we are going to talk about films, particularly The Drama and the Keeper, a film made by the Irish director, Nicky Kelly. But before introducing him to our today's audience, I want to tell you about us. For those who are here today, maybe don't know about our group of researchers. As most of you know, as a professor for the Federal University of Bahia, I am supposed, as my colleagues also are, to develop research in any literary field of studies. I have chosen to investigate Irish studies considering plays, films, novels, poetry produced by Irish authors. As most of you know, this research group that I coordinate, named ARIS, Association for Research on Irish Studies, is made of undergraduate and graduate students. And they are a very serious group, dedicated and committed to their work. They love what they do. They are always reading and investigating texts to debate later, and they read about history, Irish plays, Irish films. They bring news that are happening in Ireland, and they embrace in their research different things. Publishing is also our great concern. This is why everyone is also interested in publishing the different subjects they research. For example, plays. Sanio, who is going to interview our guest today, is interested in films. Lara is interested in music. So this is a form of disseminating our studies and Irish culture in Brazil, particularly Bahia. It is worth highlighting here the support we have received from the University of São Paulo, the support you've been receiving from the Embassy of Ireland in Brazil, and most importantly, the support of my scholars. Their interest in going deep into Irish culture has helped us promote Irish studies in Bahia, particularly in our university, the Federal University of Bahia. Together, we have been organizing a series of events such as St. Patrick's Day, Bloomsday, seminars, conferences, among others. And today, we are crossing the Atlantic again to reach our special guest, who was born and raised in Dublin, as Jessica Traynor, our previous guest, was born and raised in Ireland. Having qualified as a solicitor and given up his legal career the same day, Nick's working life has largely been devoted to creative and artistic endeavors. But he has also been employed at various times as a computer games journalist, a tennis coach, a college lecturer, and an extra on the bill. In addition to his work in film, he is a Clio-winning advertising creative, a Choice Music Prize nominated musical artist, and a young St. James Award-winning short fiction writer. Nick's first short, Delphine, or Delphine, I don't know how to pronounce, 2003, was hailed as one of the best Irish movies of the past decades. It is written in the Evening Standard, the Evening Herald. Okay. His second, Why the Irish Dance That Way, 2016, was selected by the New York's Museum of Modern Art for the shortest outstanding shorts from the international festivals. In 2009, his script Shoe won first prize in the short screenplay competition at the Vail Film Festival, Colorado, and second prize in the Champion Screenwriting Competition, Los Angeles. Nick's first short, Delphine. But today he's not talking about his shorts, but he's going to talk about his feature, The Drama and the Keeper. So thank you, Nick, for accepting our invitation. We are very glad you accepted. And Sanio is here to start our conversation, the interview. And thank you again.
Thank you very much for having me.
Okay, so let me just show the screen here. And there we go.
Sanio?
Yeah, I'm just going to start. Okay, there we go. So, Nick, I would like to start asking you, could you please share with us your journey as a filmmaker? How did you start your career? What have you been doing in the last few years?
Sure. Well, thank you. First of all, thanks so much for asking me to talk about The Drummer and the Keeper and to talk about Irish film and culture. I really appreciate the invitation. I have a strange background, which the introduction refers to a little bit. I did a few different things before I came into film. I suppose the two things that are most relevant is as soon as I had realized that I was going to be a terrible lawyer, I spent 10 years as a rock musician. And obviously, well, partially that's relevant to The Drummer and the Keeper because one of the two characters is a kind of person who I actually met quite a lot of those kinds of people in my 10 years in rock bands. But it's also true that I think film and music are maybe two very similar art forms in that they are, I think I always say to people, if you're a perfectionist, you shouldn't do either of these things because they're both chaotic, collaborative art forms. They're chaotic because they're collaborative. Humans are chaos. And if you're a perfectionist, you should paint a painting or you should write a poem, but you shouldn't try and bring 10 people on the road around Germany or to play rock and roll gigs, or you shouldn't try and shoot films because it will drive you mad. But I love the chaos of other humans. So I'm excited by doing that. And I think the time I spent in music was really, it set me up. I didn't know anything about films. Apart from just going to see films in the cinema, but when I was in rock band, it wasn't like I'd studied film in college or anything. And I don't think when I was a younger man, I was very good at telling stories because I was very interested in myself. I wasn't really interested in other people so much. So I would And when you write songs, certainly your first album and maybe your first 2 albums, they're all about how you feel inside and, you know, the people who've let you down and all of these things. And then a funny thing happens is that at a certain moment in your life, you run out of yourself. You use yourself up. You've got none of yourself left to write about, and you get bored with yourself. And then you start to be interested in other people. So that's probably a very bad sign for my own personality. But certainly when I was in my 20s, I don't think I could have made films. I don't think I had the instinct yet to tell. I didn't have the maturity to tell stories. But and then after I split the Fat Lady Sings, which is the name of the band I was in, I mean, I still do play music. I've still played music over the years since, and every so often I make a record or I'll play some gigs. But as a job, I stumbled into writing advertising. And that was the first time I was really exposed to the technical side of filmmaking, because even though I didn't have any skills in making films from my education, I realized that I quite liked writing pictures. I could write a script, and it was an amazing thing. I would sit in my room and I'd write a thing, and then 3 months later we'd be on an iceberg or in a desert and we'd be filming it. So that was very exciting to me. And advertising, I think it's a brilliant training for any filmmaker. I know so many filmmakers come out of advertising, but it's just a chance you see the best people in the world, the most highly skilled people working in a very intense way. And even if like I was a copywriter, so my job was just to eat donuts really and take care of the client. But I just think anybody, if you spend that much time on advertising film sets, by osmosis, you pick up skills. And one day I remember I was on a film set, and I just turned to the line producer and I said, "I'd love to try directing someday." And he said, "Well, get me a script by next week. There's a short film contest for funding. You can put a script in." So I had hundreds and hundreds of. I did a lot of ads for Guinness. I wrote a lot of. I made 5 ads for Guinness, but in order to make 5, I wrote over 300 scripts. So I took one of my 300 rejected scripts and I changed it a bit, and I borrowed a computer for somebody in Iceland, and I typed up a little script and I sent it in and we got the money, and suddenly I was a director. So it's a bit of a funny path into it. But I think one of the things I was just saying to you earlier, Sanio, that you make anytime you do anything creative, I mean, it's you make mistakes. You make lots of mistakes, and that's how you learn. But sadly, the world is very addicted to novelty. So oftentimes, like I made a record a couple of years ago, and I think it's the best record I've ever made. But it's I'm just that old guy who made a record 25 years ago that people know. But if you get all those mistakes out of your system in one art form, and then you go into a new art form, and if it's a similar one, which I think film is really similar to music, you find that actually even though you're an idiot because you haven't made a film before, but you're an idiot savant, you do understand more and things you can't learn in college, actually, things you can't learn in film school, but which are a lot of them are to do with working with other creative people and empowering. That's one thing I think that I really learned eventually, and I learned it the hard way from music, I think, is that thing when you work with other musicians or with other people creatively, you have 2 choices. You can try and make them do exactly what you've got in your head, and you can just boss them around, and you never get what you have in your head, but you never get anything better than it either. Or you can empower them and you can set them free. You choose them very carefully, and then you make sure that you're all roughly pointing in the same direction, and then you let them go. And that's, I think, a big lesson that I learned. It took me a long time to learn it from music, but when I went into film, on takes very often with actors, the first take I won't say anything, and like a really embarrassing high proportion of the time, like half the time, what happens is better than what I was going to say. So maybe that's one thing certainly I got from rock and roll, and that brought me into film. So that's kind of what got me to film. The Drummer and the Keeper was out in 2017. A lot of the last 2 years, which seems incredible now in this last weird 6 months, but I was touring with it. But I'm working on a feature which we're theoretically looking at shooting early next year, and then I've got two TV projects that I'm working on, and some other bits and pieces. So I can talk about all those things as well.
Okay, that's nice. So there is a sequence at the beginning of the film when Gabriel, he burns a sofa, and it's quite impressive. And I would like you to share what's the meaning behind it. I do have my point of view, but I would like you to share with us what's the meaning of it.
It's a really good question, and I'm going to have to tell you. So one of the reasons why it's so interesting having conversations like this is that when you make a film, people assume that you always had this perfect vision.
Indeed.
And so until 3 weeks, so our film was made for a very small budget.
Really?
Yeah, it was €350,000 budget. So we just put like sort of maybe $400,000. So it was very cheap film. So we were incredibly organized and planned. Like I rewrote the script 24 times after we got the money, before we filmed, to make sure everything was exactly, I'd had no fat. Everything was just sharp as it could be, because I knew we were never going to do reshoots. We had 20 days to shoot. And there's the first 6 pages of the script. So it's a 90-page script. So that's about a day and a half of the shoot. We're all about Gabriel and his band and his crisis. And we had a shot. We spent a day and a half shooting all of that sequence, which ends with him burning the sofa on the beach. And 3 weeks before we locked picture, we'd edited it for 4 months. And there was a test screening. And I went and I sat in the test screening. And everybody loved the test screening. So we got incredible marks. But I sat in the room and we'd been having a big debate about the start of the film. And I suddenly realized we're not with them quick enough. We need to be with the 2 boys quicker. So we cut the first 6 minutes of the film. There's a whole backstory about the sofa. There's a whole backstory about why Gabriel's got no pants. But actually, it looks good. It looks great. It pulls you in. And you don't really know. You don't have to know. All you have to know is dude with a problem. Like that scene, to me, it's actually, now I kind of think, when I look at it now, I think, of course, it should always have been the opening scene. It makes complete sense. But it took me the whole of the shoot and 4 months of an edit. It took me sitting in a room with 60 other strangers and realizing that they didn't really care about those first 6 minutes about why he was pulling a sofa out. So I don't know if that's a good answer for your question. What I think about it is that I in Ireland, one of the things that happens, it used to happen a lot. Ireland has an incredible literary tradition, and that's a very beautiful thing. But I think it's because as a young country, you're always trying to sort of justify your existence so that you don't have to give the keys back to your former owners. So you say, no, we have a right to exist as a free country. So as art forms, it's the poems and the plays and the novels, which are, the forms where you can write an argument. This is why we deserve to exist. And the forms which are the more, imagine what, kind of forms, which I think music and especially film and maybe painting and photography are like that. They tend to get downgraded in the culture. And in Ireland, what happened in the past a lot was playwrights would end up writing the film scripts. And there would be lots of words, there'd be lots and lots of dialogue. And the weird thing is, even though I'm an incredibly talkative man, as you're already understanding, I like writing pictures without words in them. I like the pictures to do the heavy lifting. And so I actually, what I think is the most important thing about this scene for me is that you understand, I think, really clearly a lot of the nature of Gabriel's issues without anybody saying a word about him in that first 60 seconds.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sanio, you could tell him your own interpretation to share with him.
Well, in my opinion, it's closely related to family issues, because it's like he's burning the family as an institution, because like it seems that in Ireland, this is actually something related to my PhD research, that family has been represented in a very negative way. And this is very interesting because it used to be a very cherished institution for Ireland.
That it's, well, you know, that's family lurks, I think, under the surface of a lot of this story. So that does, that is a really interesting point. And it's a really interesting point that you make more generally about Ireland and how we portrayed families. And it's very fascinating because I think a lot of that came from the fact that the traditional family was more or less mandated by the Catholic Church. So that was a prison of sorts for lots of people. And I think therefore a lot of the time, a lot of our stories were about miserable families and families we were trying to get out of and families we were going to break up, because that was the thing that couldn't be we couldn't get out of. But I have but it's really a lot. It's changed a lot. You know, it's such a different country, even in this last 20 years than probably before. So I think that the kinds of stories we're starting to tell are probably, I think you're always telling stories about families because that's the basic unit. But I think we're going to be telling different kinds of stories about families probably. And I think The Drummer and the Keeper is a little bit of a different story about families actually as well.
Sure. Now, I would like to talk about a topic that's present in the film. I have watched a few recent Irish films that explore neurodiversity, and I would like to name a few: Sanctuary, 2016, Calm with Horses, 2020, Glassland, 2014. And I have two questions on this topic. The first one is, why did you decide to explore this subject? And the second one is, what is your point of view on institutionalization of these people in Ireland?
Well, I mean, the answer to the first half of your question is that so one of my two children is autistic, and through him, I've ended up meeting an awful lot of people who are autistic and with autism in Ireland. So I felt, I felt I really knew that world actually, and I felt oftentimes people. I didn't think necessarily people had a realistic. They had different pictures of what being autistic was like, but oftentimes it wasn't correct. So I felt. That was certainly something that I had in my head. I mean, I think also, you know, to be clear, I really wanted, there was a story, I think I knew about autism, and then because of the rock and roll background I spoke of, I had actually met a lot of people who had mental health issues in the music business, because rock and roll itself is kind of slightly bipolar. I mean, it's incredible. It's like 23 hours on a bus, and then an hour of fabulous glamour on stage, and then you go back onto the bus for 23 hours. And it's both, you're kind of supposed to be a bit wild and crazy. So it's not just forgivable, but it's actually expected of you. So I think you find a lot of people who are very drawn to rock and roll because it's sort of a place where you're allowed to behave. There's a bigger bandwidth. But then I also think success is so hard and it's so stressful that I think it's very triggering as well. So I think if you've got a weakness for in a mental health area, I think it'll be exposed very often. But what I really liked was, okay, these two worlds I know. So classically, bipolar is this incredible up and down. I'm finding out there's my camera. And then when you're autistic, you're trying to, because change is very stressful for you, you're trying as much as you can to keep everything exactly the same on a straight line. And I just thought, if you take two people like this, meeting this, that's two people who you never expect to put together. So if you put them together, it'll be interesting. So that's kind of the reason I chose that topic. But I did feel I knew about that and about autism. I think in relation to the second part of your question, and it's a really important thing. So most people in Ireland, unless you had a very profound condition, you wouldn't be institutionalized. Christopher shouldn't be in an institution. He's in an institution because his family isn't working.
Exactly.
So his family has not worked. He needs to build a new kind of a family. So it's. I'm not saying that you won't find a situation where people sometimes, you see, it's a really good, and I'm glad you asked it, because it's important to say that's, from a clinical point of view, he shouldn't be in an institution. Now, when families have the stress of autism or in fact mental health issues, very often families can't cope. And you end up having a situation where a child ends up having to leave the family home and to be fostered, to be in some care situation. It's not because of the child. It's because of the family is not able to raise that child. So, I have got a point of view on all of this, which is I do think in a general way, if as our traditional families don't work for us as well as they used to, I think we all as a community, we need to have bigger families. We need more of us. Exactly. And I think, we need as neighbors and as friends and as a wider community to take more responsibility for each other, because just, your one parent or your two parents or your one brother or sister may not be enough. So I do have a point of view on that.
Can I ask you an extra question?
Sure.
Yeah, because I do feel that you build the narrative grounded in their personalities. Like you build the story based on these two guys. Like there's nothing strongly related to neurodiversity or nothing strongly related to rock bands or music. It's based on their personalities.
I'm so glad you say that, because first of all, yes, that's true. And secondly, the most interesting thing about Christopher is not the fact that he's autistic. The most interesting thing about Christopher is that he needs to get a little bit less innocent and he needs to be a little bit more worldly to be able to get on in the world. Not a lot, but a little bit. He needs to get out of his rigid thing. But it's, he's, and the most interesting thing about Gabriel is not that he's bipolar. The most interesting thing about him is he's selfish, and and he needs to be not selfish. And I think that's, I'm really glad that you say it and you see that, because it's, you know, that's I think one of the big problems with making films about people who have a condition is the condition kind of becomes a huge plot point. You know, it's like that's the reason they do it. Whereas, you know, people fall in love, and people, you know, make terrible errors of judgment, and people are hurt, and people are generous to each other, and those things happen irrespective. You know, people mental health can be incredibly strong. And I do think one of the things in the film is that just because you've got a problem doesn't mean that you can't be the most valuable person for another human being. You just might have you might be the perfect match. So I think it even goes way beyond. I mean, for the sake of our film, our two characters do have two conditions that we can put names on, but I think it goes beyond that. I think it's true of all humans. You know, I think we're always looking for somebody who can just fix the bit that we're terrible at.
Okay. There's another question here about the conclusion of the film, and I believe the conclusion has a very powerful statement regarding new family settings in Ireland. And as you said in a previous interview, it's a film about friends you need. And how important is this message for the Irish society?
I think one of the things that's happened in Ireland's become a much more cosmopolitan country in again a very short period of time, and I know that you know, we've talked in the introduction, and maybe we talk more about the Celtic Tiger and about things like that. But I think one of the things that's happened is that people, it's become much more urban. So even if you like, people tend to gravitate, especially towards Dublin, but towards the other big cities from the and you know, I think 20% of people who live in Ireland weren't born in Ireland. So the thing in Ireland that used to be the case was that things like social welfare and a lot of systems, when you looked at them on paper, they were quite creaky and not working very well. But there was an incredible unspoken system of family, which was very powerful and very beautiful thing very often. I mean, funerals in Ireland are incredible occasions because everybody really does come. Somebody once said a funeral is happier than a wedding in Ireland outside of the immediate family, because, you know, and that thing that everybody has a place in relation to everybody else, and that's very well understood and known. And that's, of course, a very comforting thing. Now, when you have a society that's diversifying and stratifying and changing very quickly, those structures are very disturbed by that, because, you know, it's my version of the world has you in that place, and now you're saying to me that you're gay, or you're going to go and live in this other place, or you're going to not do the family business, or so. I think one of the things that's happened is that we. You know, and also, sorry, our families are much smaller now. We like Irish family, the Irish birth rate is much smaller, and people travel much more. So I think that one of the unfortunate things for me about the very powerful dominance of the Catholic Church was that it wasn't so much, well, there's things about that you could speak about, but actually one of the biggest things to me was that it kind of became a monopoly of moral and caring, so that it excluded, you know, so socialism never really happened in Ireland, you know, kind of intellectual questioning and things, you know, atheists in London would get in queues and pay their taxes, but in Ireland, everything was about, you know, it was almost like if you did it right by the church, then you were fine. And with the sort of very sudden collapse of the Catholic Church, there's this weird thing where we're almost home alone, that like the other things that would have filled in societies which were more, there was less of a monopoly of moral thinking. We sort of were floundering around a bit. We're trying to work it out. So I think one of the things in, it's really interesting. I think Ireland's becoming a really interesting place. But I think a lot of the time you start to build ersatz families of friends, of you make other sort of little clusters of people to support you in your life. And we're really living through that a lot now. I think somebody from even 40 years ago who came into Dublin today would kind of be astonished at the kinds of personal support structures people have, and the ways in which, even things like we didn't have divorce until whatever 20 years ago. We didn't have any of those things, and I think there's been a tension because we've had to improvise very quickly, because suddenly it's okay, now you're a grown-up, now yes you can do it. But I think we are improvising. I think we're fine with it, actually.
It's fantastic. Now I would like the questions are actually about the development of the economy in Ireland. So the Irish economy has been growing quite a lot in the last few years. In your opinion, what were the effects of the Celtic Tiger and the most recent development in filmmaking?
Well, I think I can think of a couple of very obvious things. First of all, there's more money. Filmmaking is not a cheap thing to do. So I haven't got the figures in front of me, but I'm guessing if you were to count the number of Irish films, well, Irish funded films that were made, up to 2000, and you were to count the number of films that were made between 2000 and 2020, I'm guessing that there would be 3 or 4 or 5 times as many films made in the latter, because it's there's just been more money for us to do that. I would say I think the cosmopolitanism, which sort of, it's hard to disentangle that from the economy, because it's such we've had it. It's brought so many Irish people have ended up traveling because of the economy. The economy has brought so many people from other places in. So I think that's changed the kinds of subjects that we want to make films about. And I think the biggest thing for me is confidence and maturity. I think those two things. One is, I think we feel that we're allowed to tell stories, and lots of different kinds of stories. And the other thing I think is that we don't see, well, and this, I certainly feel this strongly. I think that it's interesting. I'm an Irish filmmaker, but I don't necessarily want to make films about being Irish. I want to make films about being human. And I think that there's a certain level of maturity and confidence where you feel, actually, I could make a film. There's an Irish filmmaker who made a film about the spaceship, which went out further than any spaceship had ever gone before, and is still out there. Why shouldn't we make a film like that? And I think that one of the things, again, maybe when we had less confidence as a country, is the kinds of stories that were funded. And, filmmaking is a hard thing to fund. They would be very much stories that would cement the national effort for survival. So there would be a lot of stories about, the Irish fight for freedom and the bad things British people have done for us. So then a lot of stories about, we're very focused in on ourselves. And I think now we're allowed to not. So in my head, very often when I write in my head, I sometimes set the story in New York or London as I'm writing it, because I just think I don't want there to be anything in this story that you have to be Irish to understand. And then, Shoe, the short film I made before I made The Drummer and the Keeper, that was actually written for the Williamsburg Bridge in Manhattan. It's a young man who goes to throw himself off a bridge, and a beggar comes up beside him and says, "If you're jumping, can I have your money first?" And then a conversation starts between them. And that was all supposed to be in New York. And we didn't get the money to do it in New York. But when we moved it to Ireland, we just cast 2 Irish actors. We chose an Irish location, and everybody says, "Oh, that's such an Irish film." But there's nothing in it. It's, so I think that's the biggest thing for me in a way. And it'll be interesting, because I think when I look at things like Mexican films, or when I think a thing that becomes, instead of it being a policy, instead of it being a theme, maybe it'll become more of an aesthetic, and that's a harder thing to put our fingers on. For me, as being an Irish person, it's harder for me to exactly say what a really successful Irish film will look like in the coming years compared to what it might have looked like before, because I think that we'll be making films about all sorts of subjects, set in all sorts of places geographically and thematically.
Okay, that's a lot. Yeah, may I ask you just one extra question?
Sure.
Yeah, actually, it's because some people claim Ireland is living the Celtic Phoenix era. And this is interesting because it seems that the films are not always located in Ireland anymore, and they are not about Irish people anymore. I can name a few, maybe Papichulu, which is very
Viva.
recent. Viva, it's one of my favorite films.
I spoke to Mark on the phone today. I'm
Really?
Yes, yeah. Who wrote it? I think it's understandable. I mean, like Irish people, I've never been to Brazil, but I know wherever I go in Brazil, there's going to be an Irish bar there. I know there's going to be you'll find Irish people all over the world, and I think it's really understandable that it's exciting. I mean, film is supposed to be an exciting thing. You want to get out. You don't want to be just trapped in your own little world. You want to go out into. You want to. I feel like Pixar, that's what I want to be. I want to tell stories that the whole world can be interested in, and I'm really interested in finding stories out in the world. And that's some of that is a privilege of just some of it's a privilege of travel and being exposed to more different cultures, like inward travel and outward travel, more cultures coming to us and us going out, and some of it's just. It's also, it's almost like we talked about family earlier, but I think Ireland, 3 generations is almost like it's like an adolescent culture. I think we've just leaving adolescence, and we don't want to do what our parents did. We want to do something different. And I think that's a really natural thing. And then, but some of the values, some of the ways of saying a thing or looking at a thing, those things you maybe they're unique, or maybe there's something you can see, but it's not I think in terms of the, maybe that stays, but I think that the appetite for new kinds of stories, I think just like, I think Mexico, when I look at Mexico, I think, well, that's what the filmmaking culture there, when I see all of the different kinds of stories that those guys are all going to, there's they're not just talking about, I don't know, whatever, bandits or whatever. They're making films in space, and they're making films in centuries hence. I think in Ireland, we've, as filmmakers, those things excite us as well.
Okay, thank you.
So now, Sanio, I think your colleagues are going to start making the questions.
Mm-hmm.
Lara is the first.
Yeah.
Oh, very good.
Mm-hmm.
So how is the research process and preparation for the actors? That's, a really interesting. A lot of the film is to do with that. I mean, first of all, the biggest thing, and I'm sure this is no news for you, but just to say it, that literally the most important decision you make is casting in a film. And if you get that right, everything else is easy. And if you get it wrong, everything else is impossible. So we took 6 months to cast, and we saw lots of actors for both of the main roles in particular. And literally the 2 guys came in together on the last day of casting. It was just coming up to Christmas, and we were started getting ready to shoot. And we'd seen really good people for both those roles, but I'd seen a thing with Dermot, and I thought he was interesting looking. And the casting agent said, "Oh, and there's a young guy who's back from LA for Christmas. He's been out there, but maybe he could come in and read, because it's a lot of it's two-hander." So the two of them came in together. They'd never met each other. We'd never met them. And they were both, as soon as I saw it, the hairs went up on the back of my neck. And I thought, oh, these are the guys. But we did sort of embed them. So there's Jacob is not autistic. He's neurotypical. But there is a lot of the kind of supporting actors and sort of extras are actually from an autism drama group. And what we did is we basically embedded Jacob in the autism drama group. And there's two other actors who are actors rather than, or three other actors who aren't autistic but are playing people with autism. And then everybody else is actually autistic. But we brought all the actors who weren't, and we just had them in the drama group for 6 weeks. And they all got to know each other. And then when we were looking for extras, I just said, let's just use everybody from the drama group, because we're, and for the other parts, and like the musician, like the band in the institution, because it just made sense. So that's, and I think similarly then for Dermot's role, I mean, I introduced him to quite a few different musicians who I knew who had mental health episodes, and I also brought that there's a big mental health hospital in Ireland, and we introduced him to people who worked there. But we also walked around the the secure rooms and all of those kinds of things. So I think, that both of them did a huge amount of research themselves as well. So, and because we were such a low budget film, we did a lot of rehearsal before we hit the set, because we just couldn't we couldn't mess around. And that was actually a real gift. By the time I hit the set, I just so believed the two of them in those two roles. So the main challenge then in making the drummer and the keeper was just, we had 20 days, and one day we got totally rained out and we just had to shoot another scene. But we were lucky as well, because we got totally rained out for the second of the football days, and two really good things happened. It was a half day and we couldn't do it because there was lots of people who was really cold and they were going to get pneumonia. And we ended up shooting the closing scene where the two boys part for the last time. And we were going to do that much later, but they didn't have any time to think about it. So it was really good, because I think they were they knew it was going to be huge, but they didn't have any time to worry about it. So I thought it was really good what they did. And then the other thing was that we were moving so quickly. I generally didn't look at rushes like my editor did, but I just thought, if I feel I've got it, I'm going to keep going, because I know I can't go back. But because the football scenes, there was a stunt, and I had him cut it together. When I looked at the scene, I thought stunt's fine, but actually it's a thing I've cut out, and I really need that beat. And because we'd moved our rained out football day, we actually got to do it. So actually a lot of things that went wrong were kind of little gifts. But no, the main challenge was just getting it through it in 20 days and getting somebody to give me the money to make it in the first place. Actually, the main challenge with every film is give me the money to make it. I mean, after that, I can fix anything once somebody gives me the money.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you both, Laura and Nick. Who is the next? Fernando?
It's Lucas.
Lucas. Hi, Lucas. I think I've slightly probably answered this earlier on, but really what I thought for me was, so, I mean, I was looking for a story about, all stories are about conflict. And I just thought that I thought it was really interesting putting two things together, which on the one hand, you might say, oh, it's film, but both people have got a sort of an issue. But in fact, the way bipolar presents, which is so chaotic and up and down, and the way autism presents, which is so linear and, trying to avoid any kind of up and down. I just thought, well, that's instantly going to be interesting to look at, that story. Because I mean, all buddy movies at one level sort of are comedies, because you're taking two people who should never be together and you're putting them together. So weird stuff is going to happen. And I just think that, you know, I did feel I knew about those two conditions, but I also honestly was just looking for a story with proper conflict and proper fun as well. I mean, because I do think, even though there's serious themes in the film, I think it's funny. So that's the reason.
Thank you. Next.
Oh, Fernando, that's a good question, actually. So here's a good question. So I already said that I changed the first 6 minutes of the film. I chopped them. For quite a long time, it was the drummer and the goalkeeper. And we had a lot of debate about it. And then we just thought, actually, yeah, the keeper's better because it's got a double entendre. It's got to, because actually, Christopher, sort of, without giving spoilers away, ends up being the person who looks after Gabriel. So yes, that it took us a while to get there, to realize what a brilliant thing it would be to drop the goal off goalkeeper, but we did do it deliberately.
Okay, great.
Thank you. Next, anybody else?
Oh, excellent question. Actually, I've never been asked this question before. Oh, that's a very good question. Well, first of all, I've never, I just want to say, ever smashed up a guitar or a drum kit, because I'm much too, it took me much too long to actually be able to own a nice guitar. But maybe I do have something in me which thinks that that smashing instruments up is a kind of a revolutionary act. Delphine, which is the first short film I ever made, my mother's name was Delphine, actually. So she wasn't a guitar player, but I just thought I'll give this 14-year-old, I think actually both Gabriel and Delphine, the difference between Gabriel and Delphine is a 14-year-old girl who really is the true spirit of rock and roll. And Gabriel is a 24-year-old man who absolutely wants to be the true spirit of rock and roll, but I think, in fact, would be better doing something else. I think rock and roll is killing Gabriel, whereas rock and roll is going to give Delphine a very interesting life.
Thank you. Manuel Alves.
Oh, thank you. So on the soundtrack, we had very, very little money, as I said. So we had a very talented guy do the score for us, and then I asked about 15 different Irish bands I knew, and that's one other good thing about having been in a rock and roll thing, is I literally got my little black book out, and I got €1,500, and I drove around with 2 contracts over 3 days, because the music clearance person said, I can't clear this all. I said, don't worry, I'll do it. So I literally got in my car and drove around to 15 different musicians and said, sign these 2 contracts. Here's €100. So that's how I got most of the music for the film. And they're all friends of mine, and they're all amazing.
Okay.
But 2 songs on this. There's 2 songs in the soundtrack. The piece of music over the opening scene is it's actually an instrumental version of a song of my own.
Okay.
Which we just were stuck for some, because suddenly when we realized that was going to be the opening scene, we had almost no time, because it was 3 weeks before we were locking pictures. So we just tried that, and that worked. And then there's one other song in the dinner party scene, which is a song of mine, but it's way in the background. But I did write 2 songs specifically for the film, kind of one each for Gabriel. I wrote a song, the song Baby, which Eddie Reader sings. I wrote that song because I wanted to give Gabriel something about, like, I think when people there's a real thing when people do bad things, you think that they're bad people. And I just think one of the things about when you have a child is you start to see not just children in a different way. Like, you suddenly understand why a child is crying in the corner. It's not just to annoy you, it's because they're tired or they're hungry. But I even think with adults, when I look at adults, even people who are terrible people or a big pain in the ass, I now start to see the child in them. I can see what they grew out of. So I kind of wanted to give Gabriel that. And then right at the end of the film, that song, Like You, it's sort of for Christopher. It's sung by Hannah, who's playing a young autistic girl, and she's really, she's a brilliant singer, and she's a brilliant actor, and she's also a brilliant writer, because I'm writing with her at the moment, something else. But
Really?
so I wrote with John, who's the composer who did the score. He had a piece of music, and I wrote those lyrics for her because I wanted to give Christopher something. I wanted to give him a song which would join up the dots, because there's a real thing about neurodiversity and all forms of disability, which is where you other the people. You think people are really embarrassed. If you have a child who's got a disability, a lot of people, they don't want to say the wrong thing. And like, it's, just human beings. They're just exactly the same as you. They're just like communicating in a slightly different way, but all the same feelings. And I just wanted to say that at the end of the thought. So and what she did, how she sang it, was absolutely beautiful. I mean, I actually get very tearful whenever I see that scene, because it's so, her performance is so beautiful. But no, it's a big moment, because it's a big moment, and I love the thing that finally Gabriel gets to, in the most Andy Warhol once said in a book that as soon as you stop wanting something, it's immediately given to you. And so right at the end of the film, when Gabriel has given up all his ideas of being a rock star, and there is this famous rock star, and he's never actually met her, because he's been imagining her all the time. But she actually does come to the little gig in the St. Cosmos, because she's a sponsor, a patron. So I just loved that little beat as well.
Okay.
Thank you. I think the only one, I'm not sure if he is Glauber. Is Glauber? Did Glauber make any question?
Yes, but there's one from Manuel too.
Oh, interesting. That's a really interesting question about wider acceptance. I think there is. I mean, I think, it's one of those things. I mean, it's are you the cause, or are you the beneficiary of it? But I think it's definitely true. I think what, 1 in 65 people in the world is autistic.
Mm-hmm.
And lots of people aren't diagnosed, and lots of people have very, very difficult times. And one of the things when you do have somebody close to you diagnosed is that you start to see it all around you in other people, including people who haven't got a diagnosis, and including in yourself. So I do think, but I think that one of the biggest things is to be out. There's such a stigma around autism, just as there is such a stigma around, mental health problems. And the worst thing about that is that when you hide them, it allows a narrative that is such a different thing, and that, it's a rare thing and it's a scary thing. Whereas if you can be out about it and admit, if you're brave enough to say I'm autistic and I don't care if the world knows it, that's an incredibly powerful thing. And I think David Byrne from Talking Heads is out about his being autistic, and there are more and more people doing that. But I mean, I had an experience very recently where my son was going to a tennis camp, and I just went over to the tennis camp a little bit early, and I just said, I said to the coaches, I said, would you mind if I spoke to the other kids and I just said, listen, I just want to say my son's coming over, and he's autistic and he might need some help. I said, does everybody, do you know what autism is? And like one little kid's hand shot up and said, I'm autistic. And another kid said, oh no, I'm autistic too. I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was amazing, because I just thought, okay, I don't think even 5 years ago, I don't think they would have said that. And there is a beat in the film about, so Asperger's syndrome is there was a kind of a thing with, that's not, that is a true thing actually, that's no longer a sort of a clinical definition. But I think a lot of people, and a lot of people, the name Asperger's is very important to them as part of their own identity, and I think that's totally fine. But there was definitely a thing where for people, when they said, okay, Asperger's not really, it's just high functioning autism, an awful lot of people were horrified because Asperger's had allowed them not have to say I'm autistic, and being autistic was so damning for them. People would treat them so badly. So I am so happy now that two little kids will just put their hands up and say, yeah, no, I'm autistic, and that we all understand that people around us are autistic, and it's, it means some things, but it means different things for everybody. And it's not it doesn't mean that you're condemned to be in an institution, or condemned to be not working, or you can never have a relationship, or any of that stuff. It's just a different way of looking at the planet, and it's a useful way in a lot of ways. So that's incredibly long answer to that question, which I can't remember, but I do think it's getting more accepted.
Another question, Manuel. Manuel, I think.
Oh, one of the amazing things about making movies so far anyway is I have met and worked with such incredibly lovely people. And it's so weird if you write stuff in a room like the one I'm sitting in, and then some months or years later, these people who are incredibly talented are go try and turn your words into these amazing characters. And so, Dermot and Jacob, and I mean all the other actors I worked with, but Dermot and Jacob in particular, they did such an amazing job. So I absolutely love Jacob. I love the fact that he is, both of them have won prizes for their performances, and both of them have been incredible advocates, not just for the movie, but for the two conditions which they're portraying. And they've been, it's very sort of humbling and beautiful thing, because you set out to make a movie and you're just trying to make the best movie you can make. Like you don't see these possibilities, but they are really, so I think it's been a fantastic bonus for me that these young actors have been such great humans for other people. They would have been great humans anyway, honestly, but it's amazing for me to see it off the springboard of the movie that gets articulated in that way. And I'm obviously thrilled when prizes are funny, but having said that, when you win them, it's amazing, especially if you make very low budget indie movies, because it's a sort of a way of telling, it's affirming, and hopefully it's helpful in terms of getting you to make another movie. So I think we've won 18 prizes around the world in the festival circuit with Drummer and the Keeper. So I'm thrilled about it, and I'm not ashamed to say that I love winning prizes.
So I think now it's my turn for my question, but I believe that you have already answered it indirectly, but the question's here, so I may.
Sure.
There are several different types of national cinema that they have emerged in different historical circumstances. Do you believe, or do you think your film embody legitimate aspects of the national cinema?
I find it's hard for, well, I think when I look at the movies around us in this last 5 years, and you mentioned some of them, you mentioned Papi Chulo and Viva, which are, gay movies set in Los Angeles and in Cuba. There's an absolutely brilliant comic ghost story called Extraordinary,
Yeah.
set in rural Ireland, and Maeve Higgins plays a driving instructor who has the power, the very unwanted power of being able to hear annoying ghosts. There's there's things like Good Vibrations, which is a little bit older, which is an amazing music. There's music movies. I feel that there's a really much bigger swathe of different kinds of movies being made now than maybe some years ago. And I do think that it's to do with it's almost like that confidence of suddenly you feel empowered to tell any kind of a story. I do think there's clearly actually it's interesting about gay themes, because that's I think that the whole marriage referendum was such a huge thing in Ireland in terms of channeling, of putting flesh on something that I think was already there, but I think it was one of those things people were so surprised at how successful, how overwhelming it was. And I think there's a lot of joy in there's a joy in diversity. So you know what? Maybe there is something. Maybe the drummer and the keeper is expressing a joy and an empowerment of diversity in the way that some of the other movies are doing, and I think that that's true of, and I think of things like Derry Girls when you get into TV as well, like Young Offenders, and it's there's it's sort of it's a sort of a joyful rampaging through the museum and knocking over statues. Not out of hatred necessarily, but certainly out of mischief. And mischief is a great thing to have in cinema, and we shouldn't underestimate it. I think it's the thing that it's the crazy idea that you allow yourself have. You know what? That's the thing. You allow yourself have crazier ideas now in Ireland, whereas maybe Václav Havel said in totalitarian regimes, the worst censor was the censor in your own head, that you would stop yourself writing that poem because you knew it could never get published. And I think we have banished the censor from our heads. But that's a duty as well. So now we just have to do really good work that's not just kicking somebody else under the table, but is for in its own, in a global way and in a human way, is good work. But I think it's a great time to be a filmmaker in Ireland, really.
Oh, thank you, Nick, for your generosity in accepting our invitation. I think everybody enjoyed this kind of chat, of interacting with you. I think we have learned a lot about Ireland. It was a very good lesson on film, on your production. So I hope you can come some other time.
I hope so. I'd love to come. I'd love to come.
And who knows, to come to Brazil after this pandemic.
Oh yes, please. I think we're. Well, you know what? That's the other thing, just to remind ourselves of. Isn't it amazing that we have films and we have TV right now? Because so much of us are, so many of the other things that we take comfort and joy from are hopefully temporarily taken away. But it does make it's a privilege to be in something where you can spread a bit of joy.
Mm-hmm. And you may believe that this is the great contribution you gave to us, mainly to the students, because they are not going to school. They need to activate the mind, the ideas. It's very boring to stay at home, and this may be one of the causes of depression. And in a certain way, you helped them a lot, coming and talking to us.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think it's really, you know what, it's stressful for everybody. I think it's one of the things when you make films as well, and you know, I'm sure some people are maybe writing or they feel they should be writing, and it's a really good chance if you can write now. But it's also, you know, everybody's got stress and everybody's
Yes.
got to just, you know, everybody's got to get the groceries and everybody's looking after other people. And so I think everybody's got to be kind to each other. It's really important to be, to not put too much pressure on, you know, and so I hope all of you are doing okay, and you know, and I hope I'll get out to see your beautiful country soon.
Oh, yes, for sure. So, and I hope to go and visit your country, because in March I had the ticket to go to Ireland, and I had to cancel my trip to Ireland.
I know.
So,
It's just going to be one of those. It's going to be one of these years. We'll just have to take a lot of photos and remember.
Okay. Thank you again, and all the best for you, for your family, and keep
Thank
health.
you so much. I really appreciate it, and thank you again, also Sanio, for facilitating all of this. I really appreciate it.
Oh yes, thank you for Sanio as well, because Sanio was always the person who, you know, go after and try to find out who can come to Brazil, or who can discuss about something about Ireland or Irish topics. And he really, this person, with the help of the others, because everyone has his or her job or her task, his task in this group that I love so much. It's very good for me because it keeps me alive. Thank you.
Very good. Oh, well, listen, thank you so much for having me, and you know, very best of luck to you all, and you know, it's a pleasure.
And
thank you very much.
I can say thank you in the name of my university and in the name of the University of São Paulo, because everything started, Irish studies started at the University of São Paulo, when Professor Munira and Professor Laura Zaha are the two who started this kind of studies, and we are very thankful to both of them, and to you and some others who are coming and help us sharing knowledge on Irish culture and other studies. Thank you.
It's pleasure. Okay, well, listen, thank you so much. Take care.
See you soon.
See you. Bye.
See you in Brazil or in Ireland, who knows?
Oh, exactly.